Hello and welcome to a Firstpost POV. If you're watching us from India, a very happy Independence Day to you. It's a big day for our country, and it could also be a big day for the whole world because just a couple of hours from now, a very important summit is going to be happening in Alaska. The US President Donald Trump will be meeting his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin. They'll try to find ways to end the Ukraine war. But Kiev and its allies, especially in Europe, feel that Putin has the upper hand here and that the President of the United States may end up making concessions to the Russian side. Are these fears warranted? And what realistically can we expect from this summit in Alaska? To try and understand some of these aspects of the talks, let me introduce my guest, who's the former US Ambassador to Ukraine, Mr. John Herbst. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for speaking to us on Firstpost. Now, first up, let me ask you, which Trump are you expecting to show up in Alaska later today? Is it the Trump who says and he brags about his relationship and friendship with Vladimir Putin? Or is this the Trump who deploys nuclear submarines to intimidate Russia? Which of these should we expect today in Alaska?
I think that we'll more likely see the Trump who deploys nuclear submarines in response to Russian threats. But it's true that Trump has had an interesting, even peculiar relationship with Putin. He's shown him enormous deference in the past, but I think he also understands that Putin is not making him look good right now.
Now, before this summit, we had that massive video call where the Ukrainian president, his European allies, and President Trump was on it. And Europe basically conveyed their red lines and their demands to the US president. They told him not to make territorial concessions without Ukraine at the table. Do you think the president of the United States understands what those red lines are?
I think he clearly understands that. He and his team were quite excited about the prospects for a meeting a week ago because it started with some very bad reporting on what Putin's position apparently was not. And then we began to see, starting on the weekend, when J.D. Vance was talking to Europeans in the UK, and then Trump's own statements about, perhaps more sanctions on Russia earlier this week. They understand that things are not easy and they got to be prepared for an outcome which is not very successful. So that's why Trump is saying that more important than his meeting with Putin would be a follow-up meeting with Putin, Zelensky, and himself, if in fact Putin shows some flexibility.
A lot of people have been talking about the 2018 meeting in Helsinki between Trump and Russia. And that's when Trump basically came out of the meeting and sided with the Russians over his own intelligence agencies, in this case, the FBI. But it's been 7 years since that meeting. Do you think President Trump, with all the experience that he's earned in office, will perhaps handle this summit or approach this summit a bit differently?
I think what you just described from the Helsinki summit reflected Trump's very, very strong views regarding the 2016 election. In other words, the view that he won and that this talk of the Russians having given him a victory somehow was nonsense. And that's why I think he sided with, quote unquote, sided with Putin against his own intelligence agencies, because that very strong feeling relating to his own performance, the integrity of the election, which he won.
The idea of this meeting essentially came last week, which is when Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, went to Moscow and he had that marathon 3-hour meeting with the Russian president. In that meeting, a lot of reports say that the Russians conveyed to Witkoff about some sort of a land agreement or a territorial concession which could possibly end the war. Witkoff came back to the US, relayed this to the US president, and Trump apparently liked it. And he said, the only way you can end this war is if there are land swaps and both sides give up territory. But do you think there was perhaps a miscommunication between the Russians and Witkoff as to what this territorial concession or this idea of a deal might be?
Well, to be clear, I was obviously not in that conversation. I've not heard a recording of that conversation, so I don't know for sure. What is absolutely clear is either Putin with Witkoff offered some serious concessions. The first time Russia's spoken of concessions in connection with ending the war in Ukraine, or Witkoff misinterpreted what Putin said. And if Putin had said something like along the lines Witkoff apparently described to Trump, then he changed his mind and claimed he never said it. So we don't know where that bad information came from, whether it was from, again, Putin's words or Witkoff's interpretation. We just don't know.
Right. Now, it's clear that you can't end a war in one sitting, certainly not a war as complicated as this one. But what can the US president realistically hope for from this summit? Is it some sort of a mini ceasefire, a ceasefire in the aerial battle, some sort of a bilateral concession? What can you hope for in Alaska?
Well, I think Trump's kind of said it in the past few days. He will determine at the summit whether Putin is truly interested in peace. If he decides Putin is truly interested in peace, Trump will try to arrange, or will arrange, a trilateral summit, Putin, Zelensky, and himself, and maybe even, as he said last night, including some other European leaders. So this is an occasion for Trump to take Putin's measure. Now, my strong view is that Putin has no interest in ending the war. He thinks that he's winning on the battlefield. He thinks that Ukraine, if it loses, especially American support, will be there for the taking. And his aim is to not annoy Trump, yet not make any real concessions for peace. And if Trump figures that out, then I suspect he will do what he said, which is put enormous pressure on Russia, which would make Putin's life far more difficult and his ability to continue the war far more difficult.
Let's assume that the talks break down, and President Trump has said that there's a 25% chance that there won't be peace at the end of this summit. And he says that within the first 2 minutes of meeting the Russian president, he'll know whether a deal is possible or not. Let's assume no deal is possible and Trump comes away without any sort of agreement in Alaska. What does he do next? Does he double down on sanctions and secondary tariffs on countries buying from Russia? Or does he just cut his losses and say the peace is not happening, let's just stop giving military aid to Ukraine and walk away from this whole process? What does he do?
I think it would be very hard for Trump to say at the same time, one, Putin's not interested in peace. Two, I'm going to disengage entirely from this war. Because if disengagement means America stops providing military intelligence to Ukraine, if the U.S. decides that no, even Europe cannot buy weapons from us to give to Ukraine, then he's essentially handing Putin a victory, and Trump would look very, very weak. So I don't think Trump's going to do that.
The White House has said that it was the Russian president who demanded this meeting. He sought this meeting with the US president, and Trump just agreed to it. And if that is how things went down, we haven't heard from the Russians, but if that is how things went down, why do you think Putin was open to this meeting now, 3 years after the war started and almost 6 months into the Trump presidency? Why now?
Well, it's very simple. Putin was concerned about Trump's threat to put major sanctions on Russia and its trading partners if, in fact, because Russia was not going to make peace. So he diverted Trump from doing that by proposing the summit. And this is the second time Putin has done this. In May, in the middle of May, there was a meeting in Europe with many European leaders and Zelensky. They called Trump, and they all agreed, Trump apparently too, that if Russia did not stop shooting, there'd be major new sanctions. Putin immediately called for a meeting between himself and Zelensky. Trump said, yes, it's a good idea, and Trump dropped his interest in sanctions. So this is the second time Putin has played this card. I hope Trump understands that. I think he probably does.
Let's look at it from the other side now. And I know that's difficult for you as a former US official, but if you are on that Russian delegation in Alaska and if you are trying to negotiate with the US president, what's on your wish list? What are you trying to get out of it? Is it some sort of a bilateral concession, maybe more trade or less sanctions from the United States, and try to keep Ukraine off the table as much as you can? What is on your wish list if you're on the Russian delegation?
Well, clearly the most important goal is to make sure that Trump does not proceed with the punishing sanctions. That's why you have this meeting to begin with, because Putin's effort to divert from that possibility. But obviously the Russians would like to normalize relations with the United States, even as they continue this brutal aggression in Ukraine. I have no doubt that there might be some advisors around President Trump who would not mind doing that themselves. But again, Trump is in no position to do it. He said he could end this war, well, first within 24 hours and within several months, and he is connected with this effort. And he has also said, as have others, that there cannot be a real normalization of U.S.-Russian relations as long as this war continues. But the Russian aim is to stop American support for Ukraine, normalize the relationship as a way to do that, and I don't think they're going to succeed with that.
Right. Now, in any peace talk, the mediator or the negotiator is very important. And in this case, that's Donald Trump. But I have to wonder if he's the right person for the job. And I'm not just talking about the temperament aspect of it. I'm also speaking about the fact that he's not neutral, for instance, because America remains the biggest supplier of weapons to Ukraine. At the same time, there's also the Nobel Peace Prize angle, where Trump is clearly doing all of these so-called peace talks to get that award and not necessarily with the intention of creating lasting peace. Is he the right man for the job?
Uh, the United States is still easily the most powerful nation in the world in all respects. And so we have tremendous leverage if we choose to use it to help Ukraine, to make Putin's chances of winning this war possible. We can stop that. I think Trump understands it. He has been reluctant to use that power against Russia. He's threatened it a lot, but he's not done much in that regard. But if he wants to achieve a peace, he's going to have to persuade Putin that war is more painful than peace. And that requires American pressure.
Right. And what's the sentiment in the US like right now? Is there an acceptance now after 3 years that a military solution, at least for Ukraine, is not possible in this battle? And if the war is to end, from Ukraine's perspective, it has to be at the negotiating table, that there's no other way to do this?
What you've got in the United States is large support for Ukraine. Polls have shown that well over 60, even up to 70% of Americans not only believe that Ukraine has a right to live as an independent life, that Russia's war is brutal and should be stopped, but even that large number would be willing to continue providing the large amount of assistance that Biden provided, that Trump has now stopped. So American support for Ukraine is very solid. And even amongst Republicans, a majority support American aid for Ukraine. How you get peace, I'm not sure the the people are paying that close attention, whether it's at the negotiating table or on the battlefield. But they do understand, because they're practical, they're commonsensical, that having a good military position is almost always essential for achieving a good peace.
Finally, let me just ask you, as a former US official who's looking at these talks happening in Alaska, two very unpredictable people coming together to strike a peace in a third country effectively, what's the best case scenario and the worst case scenario that you're looking at as a former US ambassador to Ukraine?
Well, the worst case would be some sort of rapprochement or a beginning rapprochement with Russia, even as it conducts this brutal war in Europe, which is certainly a danger to American interest. And again, I'm skeptical that will happen. I think the best realistic outcome is that Trump truly understands that Putin does not want peace, and that he returns to the policies he developed for roughly 2 months, starting in some point in late May, early June, and begins to put serious pressure on the Kremlin to make peace.
Right. Well, the build-up to this summit has been intense, almost Cold War-esque in the way the coverage has happened. But obviously the question is whether that build-up will actually deliver when it comes to Alaska. And let me tell you, it's not just the US or the Russians or the Europeans. Even here in India, there's a lot of excitement and a lot of suspense about how this is going to play out, because we have our stakes in this too. So we'll be tracking this closely. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for speaking to First Post.